CAT8
is a group of Jain individuals and professionals
who are assisting the community at large
during the COVID-19 crisis.
CAT8 began just before the COVID-19 crisis,
when it held a can challenge,
where children created iconic monuments
using cans of food. It raised some 3 tons of canned food,
enough supplies for 4 months.
For the Watford Food Bank,
run by the Trussell Trust.
During the COVID-19 crisis,
CAT8 is helping the elderly, the vulnerable,
Those in isolation and key workers.
with meals and essential shopping.
help with medicine collection
and someone to talk to,
whilst coping with isolation.
CAT8 is organising webinars,
imparting information and creating awareness.
a range of topics
for all age groups.
In addition, we have created a business and education helpline
for individuals and businesses
that need further guidance
on the topics of all the webinars.
We also have a YouTube channel,
A Facebook page and a Twitter handle.
CAT8 is a newest network fibre,
Connecting the community.
Slide, please. Thank you. We are very kindly supported by a number of businesses to enable us to carry out our work. Our speakers today are Sawan and Drishti Chauhan. Sawan has a profound interest in education and helping the younger generation. He studied medicine at the University of Birmingham and has sat on interview panels at university. His company, Sawan Limited, specializes in university, medical, and dental admissions, as well as university exams such as BMAT, UCAT, GAMSAT, IMAT, and TSA. The company also helps applicants with personal statements and university interviews, including the MMIs. It also focuses on Oxbridge applications and interviews. The company is based in Stanmore and trains national and international students, both face-to-face and online. The company's motto is to bring out the best in each and every individual. Drishti is a final year biomedical sciences student at St. George's University. She is looking to transfer to medicine. She did her A-levels in 2018 in biology, chemistry, and psychology. So over to you, Sawan. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you so much for the introduction. I'm just going to share the slides. So thank you so much for joining the webinar. In terms of we're going to be looking at the transition from A-levels to university. And this is really a very important topic because both myself and Drishti and obviously the panelists will help you with regards to this topic area, but it's a very profound kind of topic because a lot of people are not aware of all the different factors involved in terms of when moving from A-levels to university, both in terms of from an academic perspective, when you're dealing with how, for example, studies would be different and how your approach to studies would be different, but also from the perspective of, say if you move away from home, live outside of, move away from home and live outside, what kind of independence factors do you need to kind of consider? So this is what we want to address today, and obviously looking at factors after that, like after uni as well. So that's the purpose of this presentation, and I hope that by the end of this presentation that you will find this very beneficial. But also in the current moment, I hope everyone is actually well and keeping...
Sawan, you need to share the slide, sorry. It hasn't been shared.
It hasn't been shown, sorry.
No.
Sorry about that. Okay, sorry, can you see the slides now? If I do the full screen.
Yes, we can see the slides. Just make
Okay.
them into that. That's it. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. So yes, so I hope everyone's well as well at this moment in time in the current situation with COVID and so on. Okay, so with regards to basically some of the important facts and points that you need to be aware of when actually going to kind of university from A levels, you do need to be aware that depending on which university you're going to be going to. So, for example, if you're going from say a UK university to a Scottish university, then circumstances may be different compared to, say, if you're going from a UK university to one in the UK, that is England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. So what it is that if you're a home student, you'll be classified in terms of the fee structure very differently to if you're an international student. So for example, if you're a UK student who wants to go to university in Scotland, such as Aberdeen or Glasgow, you will be classified as an international student. And that would be the same if you're from Wales or Northern Ireland. But if you are a UK-based student, so from England, Wales, and Northern Ireland, and you go to one of the other, say if you decide to go to Cardiff, you will still be paying the home fees. So it's very important to consider your circumstances based on that. But it is interesting that actually, if you're a Scottish national, and you decided to go to a university in Scotland, that is actually free for yourself, including the university tuition fees are actually free. And also, if you come from any other EU country, it will also be free. But that doesn't obviously include England, Wales, and Northern Ireland, but say other EU countries such as France, for example, or Germany. So that's something you have to be aware of. It is also important to note that international students pay a lot more in terms of the tuition fees than home students. And that does vary, by the way, in terms of the popularity of the course. So courses such as medicine, for example, or dentistry, you could end up paying a substantial amount more. But in any course, actually, it will be more expensive anyway for international students. One of the key things about the student loan, though, is that basically the tuition fees are, in terms of the student loan that you get to pay off the tuition fees, it's actually one of the better types of debt to have, because the reason for that is when you actually start working, you will not end up paying the student loan until you earn above a certain threshold. And when you get above that threshold, they will only take 9% of your earnings above that. So what usually tends to happen is that most graduates and most people will probably not end up paying the entire student loan back in their working life. Students may not also end up paying the full amount borrowed. For many courses, that is actually correct, especially the arts and humanities courses or other courses, for example, where say the starting salaries for graduates are actually lower. And in some cases, depending on what you go on to do, it may even be voluntary in terms of like how you end up paying it back. And I'll talk to you more about that when we look at the section on student finances. And then also it's very important to note that for obviously some careers such as accountancy, engineering, and many others, it may not even be essential to go to university. The reason being that you may be better off doing an apprenticeship, because by doing an apprenticeship, you would actually gain the professional qualifications at the same time as actually being paid, as well as getting the experience from the industry sector. So you're combining three things and not accumulating debt, like say if you had gone to the traditional unis, for example. And in such careers like say accountancy, if you graduate with an accountancy degree, then you still have to end up doing the professional qualifications after you graduate anyway. So therefore, in some cases, it may be better to find an apprenticeship with a very sensible organization. Then also, in addition to that, it's worth noting that in addition to your tuition fee loan, there will also be other fees that you'll have to pay whilst at university. So for example, fees for living. So say, for example, renting out halls or flat or a home, depending on which year you are in university, you might actually also benefit from maintenance grants or maintenance loans if you can't get a grant. There are certain types of special support grants that are available, but these are often means tested for these purposes. So it's worth checking that up in terms of with your, like, say, local borough, local council, and also the student finance team, which is Student Finance England, to help with the accommodation and living cost side of things. But just to note that tuition fee loans are not actually means tested. So that means that anyone could apply for a tuition fee loan. But for maintenance grants, it is actually subject to means testing. In terms of uni scholarships, there are a wide range of scholarships that are actually available, and many people seem not to be aware of this. So there's a good website there, which I've actually included, which is worth paying note to, because there are a lot of scholarships that are actually sponsored by private individuals, private organizations, and even the government, actually, in some cases. So actually, it's worth like looking into that. If you can qualify for that, then that's even better, depending on the course you're pursuing, and your circumstances, obviously. Then it's also worth noting that in the current climate, and also in the recent times, when you actually do graduate, the roles that are available for graduate trainees and interns are highly competitive from a job perspective. And so you need to produce the best results at university, and also you do need to be doing a lot of other things whilst you're at university in order to stand the best possible chance of getting good jobs once you graduate. There are no half terms in university. So like many of you will be in schools right now, like year 12 and year 13. So you benefit from half terms. You don't actually get that at university. It's just going to be a full term. Although saying that universities do usually start like later than traditional schools, and you may also have reading weeks depending on which course you do and which university you go to. One of the things that is actually baffling is that actually a lot of the people who are self-made billionaires and who are very rich have never actually been to uni. And if you look at people like, for example, Warren Buffett, if you look at people like, for example, Bill Gates, or even people like, so most billionaires, they haven't really actually been to uni, or they might even have been dropouts. And actually the reason for that, in terms of why they go on to do so well, is obviously they have to think outside the box, and they have to actually possibly even end up pursuing careers that were different to what they were actually studying. So this makes, the message here is that it's possible to do anything as long as you can actually be creative, you have that motivation to do well and the dedication to do well. So it's not exactly true to say that you have to go to university to do well, but university is still important. Okay, so that means that when you actually move away from your school setting to the university setting, everything will have to change, including your mindset, your mind frame, if you're going to be doing well. You can't just stick to the same kind of routines in terms of your study methods, how you operate, how you socialize, how you interact with people. It's going to be very different when you're at university, and you have to be prepared for the change. And those who are willing to change, those who are willing to have a new mindset, are likely to be the ones, having the best results there. So that's worth basically, noting as well. It's completely different out there. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to actually allow Drishti to talk to you about the key differences, between school life and university life, and also the, what happens in your first year. So she'll give you some kind of advice on that.
Thank you. So I'm going to talk a bit about all the differences that there are, just like Sawan said. So one of the key differences that you'll notice when you actually are in uni, there's no actual syllabus for you to be able to follow. So in terms of knowing what you have to learn and what you need to know at the end of the semester or end of the year for your exams, it's kind of left up to you. So learning is a lot more unstructured as well. So you go for lectures, and I mean, sometimes at the beginning of the lecture on the slides itself, they'll give you some of the main learning objectives that you need to know, but it's kind of up to you to put them together and then know the specific information for what you're learning. Obviously, like in school, you'd always have, a teacher or someone telling you maybe when to start revising or how to learn, study tips basically. The lecturers are it's quite disjointed, where it's just a lecturer giving you the information and then you have to go and study it, and there's no actual proper direction or guidance. Sometimes I think in terms of depending on the course that you're on, there's a lot more self-reading that you need to do. So you need to like go away, spend some time, get a few textbooks or something, even if you understand it, because when you have essay questions, for example, you kind of have to show that you've done a bit more wider reading, because that will really boost your scores. And it also helped with your understanding, because obviously university now is going to be testing you more on your understanding and the way you synthesize information rather than just like being able to recall facts. Another key difference is that obviously in a lecture theatre, I mean, obviously right now it's probably going to be online for most of you, all of you. But when you do eventually get into the lecture theatres, it's going to be roughly around 100 to 400 students. So, it's not exactly going to feel like a school classroom experience where you probably just experience maximum 30 children or something. So in terms of like paying attention and focusing, it's going to be a lot more different. Most of the lecturers will probably upload their PowerPoint slides maybe on your university's intranet or something. And I mean, what I do is basically you just download them and then you can just annotate them instead of trying to write down everything that the lecturer is saying, because you won't have enough time and then you might miss something in trying to write down everything. Obviously, because there's going to be like 100 to 400 students in your lecture theatre, it's not going to be very effective unless you come back home like the same day and then go over it again. So most universities, for some courses, they provide like small group teaching where, I mean, like, for example, in science-based courses or like medicine, they have something known as like PBL or CBL, or so that's basically problem-based learning or case-based learning. And that basically just allows you to get more information. And like, I mean, obviously some people, if you have 400 students in a lecture theatre, you might be a bit shy to ask questions then. So when you're in a small group teaching, you'll be able to ask the tutorial leader or the lead of the group, who will probably be another academic, certain questions that you might have. When it comes to actually doing the exams, they're going to be different to the exams that you've had during your A-levels. In the fact that there'll be different formats. So you'll have like possible multiple choice questions, or like in my university, they call them SBAs, which is single best answer. And then you can have SAQs, which is short answer questions. So probably 1-2 marks, you just have to write a couple of sentences. And then again, depending on your university, like for medicine, they have something known as OSCEs or OSPs. And they're basically anatomy-based exams, or like clinical examinations. So they want to see your people skills. So you could have practical exams, or you could have mainly just written exams. A key difference is that whenever you do your exams, it's going to be marked by the university. So there's no specific exam board. So there's not really much external information that you can get in terms of like trying to find different questions. Obviously that leads on to the next point, where there's not many past papers which are accessible. So that's one thing that we found in our university, where they don't really give you any past papers. I don't know, possibly because they recycle some of the questions. But I mean, what they do is sometimes there's something called a formative exam or a summative exam. So the summative exam is the exam that you'll do at the end of the semester, the one that will count for the results. The formative exam will be kind of like a mock exam, where they might give you like 1 or 2 different question types. So you can kind of get an idea as to how the exam will be when you eventually do it. And most of the time, I mean, you don't really ever get to see your papers again. So once you've done the exam, you just get your results and you don't know where you went wrong. But I know in my university, for example, quite a few students complained, because obviously that wouldn't be, you want to know where you went wrong. So sometimes, dependent on what course you're doing, they might allow you to just view the scripts once in like a booked time slot. So it can kind of help you in terms of, where exactly you've gone wrong, and just, generally for help and stuff as well. Next slide, please. So obviously right now you don't really need to be worrying about, second year, third year, or however many years you'll be studying, but the first year at university is probably one of the best years you'll have. Obviously I know right now it's going to be very different in terms of freshers week and everything. Some people might be having online freshers, some people might just not be having freshers at all this year. But it doesn't mean that you can't still get involved and still have fun. Like, I'm sure they'll have different things planned for online freshers if they do have it, because, you still want to end up making friends and enjoying your course and everything. Now, in terms of the actual things that you're going to be studying in first year, usually you'll feel quite a transition, not just because of academically, you know, everything. I mean, it's not very different to A levels because they're not going to make it really difficult, you know, the first week that you're there. But I feel like maybe personally as well, I felt more of a transition in terms of like you're going to come across different people. They're going to be from like all over the country. I mean, there'll be less international students this time, but there will still be people from different countries. So, you know, the transition is more in trying to adapt socially as well as academically, and, you know, figuring a lot of stuff out and how to balance, you know, work life and social life, because you want to keep them in balance if you want a good degree at the end of the day. I mean, one thing that's guaranteed for most students is you can live in halls. So you can have accommodation like on the campus or on site or near the campus, for example. And then most people move out in the second year once they've made their friends and they want to, you know, live out, obviously, if they live far away from the university as well. But I know that in some universities, you can also ask if you don't really have anywhere else to live, or you don't have many people that you want to live with, you can still live in the halls if you just ask the accommodation people what their terms and conditions are. In terms of the actual academics that you'll, you know, the stuff that you'll actually need to know for your degree, most of the time, the first year doesn't count. It's usually second year onwards. But I think for some science-based courses, like for example, in St. George's where I go and I'm doing biomedical sciences, our first year counted for 10%. So just make sure that you know exactly what you have to study and, you know, the exams that you'll be having and how much they'll count, because you don't want to lose out. Even though it just sounds like 10%, it all adds up eventually. So you want to be doing the best that you can. Yeah, so the easier and the better that you find, you know, fitting into uni, and the more you get yourself out there, you'll find you'll transition better, and you'll find it easier to get into university, you know, workflow and everything. So yeah. So obviously once you've done the exams, again, they're not exactly graded the same way that they would have been during GCSEs or A levels. It's broken down into modules. So sometimes you'll get tested on maybe 2 or 3 modules that you'll do that semester, or they might just test your modules individually, I think. And in order to be able to pass the semester's exams or the whole year, you'll have to pass each module. And if, you know, and I mean, the minimum that you'd need is for most exams is probably 40%, but some science-based courses, they can increase the pass rate at 50%. And I think Oxford is probably 65%. And the grading would be based on, you know, like degree classification. So it would be a first, a 2-1 or 2-2, and then anything below 2-2 would be a fail. You kind of, sometimes you can get like in-course assessments. So like if you do a dissertation, or sometimes they ask you to do written like papers and, you know, kind of like mini dissertations. And those can count towards your marks as well. So it's not all just what you do in the exam at the end of the day. It's also in terms of how you do throughout the semester or throughout the year. And that can help build up your marks so you get closer to whichever, you know, if you want a first or a 2-1, for example. Usually you have one opportunity to resit. But I think when you go for that resit, I think the mark is usually capped. Sometimes it's capped. So you just have to be careful that, you know, you want to make sure that you're getting the best grades that you can. And obviously if you have any extenuating circumstances or any mitigating circumstances, then there's usually a form or something you have to fill out, and then they'll allow you to sit the exams, you know, dependent on whatever's gone wrong with doing the exam. Obviously that's all the exam and the study side of things, but obviously university is about a lot more as well. So accommodation, I mean, usually it is guaranteed for first year. You know, very rarely do students have to try and find private accommodation. But if like eventually when you go into second year and third year and beyond, when you have to get your own house or flat with your friends, you will kind of have to think about money a bit more. So when you're in halls of accommodation, you obviously don't have to pay any council tax. You usually just have to pay rent. But when you eventually get your own place, you will have to probably apply for a council tax reduction, because that you want to save money, because your money will be going on everything else. Obviously, you'd have to figure out how you're going to be paying rent and organize that between you. And one main thing that I think all students should be wary of is usually, rogue landlords. So sometimes you'll be paying rent, but, the place might not be up to the standard of the rent that you're paying. And obviously, you usually have to sign a tenancy agreement as well. And you just have to double check everything, because sometimes in the tenancy agreement, they might put in like a cheeky clause or something saying that you can't exactly leave halfway, and, other terms and conditions that you should be aware of. I mean, you'll have to, obviously, if you're living out, you're going to have to pay for food, books and course materials. I think that's usually like, you should use your library as much as you can, because they would have all the books that you would need for your particular course. And, most universities are quite big, so their libraries are going to be amazing. So you will usually find everything. You won't have to spend your own money on any textbooks or anything. And obviously the fun side of things. So when you're going on nights out and everything, obviously if you're in London, you're going to have to budget a bit more, because a lot of money can go in just one night out. So, and another thing is, like, obviously when, like, once all this coronavirus is over and people can eventually go out, it's not something you have to worry about now, but just in terms of general safety, just be careful when going out, like, have trusted friends and stuff around you, because it's easy to give into peer pressure and things like that. And you don't want to be, stuck in that when you're trying to have a good university experience. Financial and like budget management, obviously save money wherever you can, using like discounts all the time. So like you get offers and stuff from like uni days and student beans and stuff like that. So use those apps as much as you can, because they really do help, and trust me, you'll save a lot of money. Eventually, when you get into second year and beyond, you will probably have to get transport. So probably get the tube or bus, or wherever you go to university. And sometimes those costs can add up. So, you might just think tapping once with an Oyster card on the tube or something, for example, it will add up eventually, because that's about £5 per journey. So you end up starting to calculate things a lot more, and it will make you a bit more aware as well. Yeah, and then in terms of like, if you ever have any problems or anything at university, there's always, like, student welfare is number one. So they want to make sure that you're safe wherever you are. I know my university provided us with bystander training. So, how to deal with certain situations if you see anything going on, harassment, etc. And how to stay safe, like when going out and in the course, etc. And then there's also like, usually have the students union. I mean, during freshers as well, like usually the students union hosts really good events. So even if you don't get to go on nights out, the students union always have you covered. Yeah, I think that's it. Thank you. I'm going to pass back to Sawan now.
Okay, thank you so much, Drishti, for that. That was very useful. So there's also lots of other opportunities at university. It's not just about the academia side of things, but also the vast range of opportunities you have to really excel and to develop your kind of skill set. So firstly, there's so many societies in university which you can actually get involved with according to your interests and according to where you see yourself going in the future. So, for example, there are both UK and European-wide student associations. So, like for pharmacy, there is BPSA and EPSA. So, for this is for the students, that is. So, participating in such societies can really be useful, because you get a first-hand experience of basically like what is like current, and you get to meet a lot of people, get involved in projects that are current. And so you can really build good contacts in this way. And the experience is obviously something that you cannot get from doing other things just by studying, for example. So it's worth taking kind of full advantage of the range of societies that are available. And universities do have a vast number of these societies. So it's a case of just, choosing what you are interested in particularly. The universities also offer a lot of opportunities to actually spend some time abroad. They're quite open to the idea because they want to see their students excel and gain experience, and then take all that information that they've learned together with the experience and utilize that in their future careers. So there are lots of exchanges or transfer projects that actually go on inside the universities. You just simply have to check with the relevant university, what kind of programs they have, which kind of countries they're holding exchanges with. And in some cases, you can also go on projects such as like the Erasmus Plus program, that is mainly to do with something that's basically jointly held with other European countries and universities. So in terms of like how you can actually gain experience in particular disciplines abroad, and that is there to like share information, share research, and really get involved with international projects. Electives can also take place as well, especially relevant for the science-based careers such as medicine and even dentistry. You get to spend some time abroad and experience healthcare settings in different other settings. That could be even third world countries, for example, war-zone countries as well at times. So you really can really get yourself hands-on and stuck in. Grants can also be offered as well. So it's not, although these projects might seem that, okay, there is yet more finance involved, there are lots of opportunities to seek grants for such projects like the transfers and the electives and exchanges. It's worth just paying attention to like your university student portal because many of the grants are actually made kind of available there, and you just have to simply apply for it, give reasons why you benefit from the grant, and then it will be based on the university's discretion who can actually get these grants. Many courses also benefit from, they hold something called sandwich courses. So you spend a year in industry in between usually your second and third year. And that's really a chance for you to put your knowledge that you gain in university into perspective in industry. Again, you get very vital contacts this way. And in many cases, some people develop so good contacts that they could actually go back there after they finish the degree and actually work for such big organizations, that it can be very beneficial to opt for a sandwich course where possible, because you do then get experience, not just a degree, you also get experience. Some people may opt to do masters, so that's an additional year on top of your standard degree program. Masters can be actually very useful, especially if you want to go down the route of research later on in life, or you want to just build on your knowledge and skill set, or you find a particular area of study very interesting for yourself, then it's worth actually pursuing a master's after your program is actually over. But sometimes you might just want to go for a master's straight up rather than the traditional program. That's also acceptable. Some people, like we have Pranay, for example, on this panel, he's doing a PhD. So PhDs can also be very effective as well, because people who want to do research or go and pursue a doctorate can actually benefit from this. You might have an interest in a particular area where you really want to develop that further by, not just in terms of knowledge, but in terms of participating in future advancements with other peers and colleagues, both nationally and internationally. So you could really benefit from this. And then in many cases, you can also use a PhD to go and lecture inside universities. So it can be beneficial for some individuals if you're interested in that. It's an additional 3 years. So obviously that means a longer duration in university, but the time spent there could be very effective. So therefore, it may be worth, in some cases, for some individuals. Research is a big element in all universities. I mean, all the Russell Group universities have very big, funds that go into research. That is why they're kind of Russell Group universities. They spend a lot of money in research because they're looking at new advancements, not just in science, but more generally. And essentially that means that they've got a lot of academics in these universities who spend time lecturing, spend time, with clinical research, and they really want to help, the world kind of go forward. So that's why they're doing these type of projects. And it can be very worthwhile and very satisfying when you come up with something new and can publish papers, publish books, things like that. Some people may opt for joint degrees. Now, joint degrees can be beneficial as well, because some people want to, for example, mix in their kind of degrees because they have an interest in more than one area. That is absolutely fine, and may even give you an advantage when you're actually out there on the job market, because you have more than just one specialty as such. So that might be something that for some people they might want to consider, especially more on the arts and humanities kind of fronts, where it's much more competitive and fewer jobs available. Extracurricular activities are obviously one of the most important things in university, both from a point of, it's a high pressure, high stress kind of environment because of the intense academic studies there. So you obviously need extracurricular activities to keep yourself well motivated, to give you a sense of relaxation as well, but also to, again, boost your skill set in terms of from a job market perspective. You want to get involved in as many things you can potentially do to build your skills, so that when you get out there, it is quite clear to an employer that you are just more than just an academic, and that you can contribute to their also organization in more ways than just by studying. Many universities also have obviously careers fairs and events that take place, especially more relevant for people who are in the penultimate year or in the final year, because the big employers will always be there offering essentially graduate trainee roles, internship roles. They're seeking out the best people out there. So if you can make a real good impression, then obviously, this is the time where people will be saying, okay, this is potentially somebody who I could see in my organization, for example. So lots of big organizations obviously do that. You can also get involved with opportunities at more global kind of organizations, such as the WHO, for example, for language-based careers, science-based careers. NGOs, which are non-governmental organizations as well, have various programs as well. So it's worth also looking out for these, not just corporate environments. Sports is a huge factor that goes on in universities. Universities are very competitive, even against each other. So they want to compete. Like everyone's heard of the competitive boat race between Oxford and Cambridge, for example. There's lots of sports events that go on in universities, and it's worth engaging in some of these because you get to meet some really good contacts. Who could also end up becoming lifelong friends, for example. So try and participate in as many events as you can. And also, it's interesting to note that basically some programs may also be sponsored by certain organizations. So like the armed forces may get involved in sponsoring your studies if you, for example, spend some time in, for example, the Navy or the Royal Air Force or with the Army a certain number of years. So they could actually contribute that way. So again, there's just a vast array of opportunities available in university, and you probably never imagine some of the diversity that you could see there. It's much bigger than obviously schools. Okay, so this is a very big section now in terms of student finances, and I'm sure a lot of individuals will be very interested in this, including obviously parents and so on. So obviously the tuition fees at the moment, as we speak, are for home students are 9,250 per year in the UK, but for Welsh universities such as Cardiff, it's actually currently 9,000 per annum. So it's slightly cheaper, but obviously not that significant in terms of the difference. For international kind of students, the fees can be extortionate and can get, very, very high. So anyone who's planning to obviously send the kids from abroad into the UK must be obviously aware of that, and obviously budget for that. And for internationals, it's obviously much more difficult to get any sort of access to loans, essentially. The tuition fee loan, as I previously mentioned, isn't really income assessed. So for home students, for example, you can, even if you're extremely wealthy, you can still apply for a tuition fee loan, and they won't ask you about your income situation. So that is why most people do apply for this. It is paid directly to the university. So the reason for this is before it used to be paid to the students, and then used to pay the university when requested. But there's some naughty things going on where some students would not really spend it on their tuition fees and go and spend it on other things. So essentially, this is why it's now paid directly to the university, straight up. For some programs which are accelerated programs, like you have a 4-year, for example, program for medicine, you might end up paying more. So rather than the 9,250, you might end up paying 11,100 per annum, just because it's accelerated, and the universities are obviously needing to make the monies as well. The maintenance loan depends on various factors. So how much you get depends on your actual situation in terms of financial situation and where you're based as well. So people in London will obviously receive more from a maintenance loan perspective, simply because rent is extortionate in London, and living costs are also extortionate in London. So you get around 12,010 per annum when you're living in London if you're away from home. If you're living basically just at home, you get obviously less. You get 7,747 at the present moment. And if you're living away from home, but you're outside London, so say, for example, your family home is in London and you decide to go outside London to uni, you'll get about 9,203 per annum. Now, these are loans. So in other words, you still have to pay them back. and you will still be charged interest on them. So, that's worth noting. As I previously mentioned in another slide previously, that you can, for some people, get maintenance grants, but it will obviously be means tested. So you have to check that your financial situation deserves that, because they're just not given out as obviously gifts. So yes, and basically what it is that the interest rates used to be very, very workable, but now it's actually quite extortionate. And you now have basically interest rates of 3% plus the RPI at the time. So say right now it's probably around 5.4%. So this is obviously absolutely huge in terms of the interest rates, and many people are obviously concerned about that in terms of how can they actually afford to pay this back and so on. And the worrying thing is that the interest starts kicking in from day one. So as soon as you start, interest will start kicking in essentially. But it's worth noting that some people who are already at university may be on a cheaper program, a cheaper loan program, because perhaps they want the Plan 1 loans. There's two different types of loans, Plan 1 and Plan 2. Anyone going to university now will obviously be on a Plan 2 loan at a higher rate. So so that's worth actually noting as well in terms of whether you want to take out a loan from the tuition fee perspective, or even from the maintenance loan perspective, or whether you feel it's actually better to not take out the loan if you are fortunate enough and can actually pay up the university fees straight up. Then that's something you may want to consider. One of the most important things, though, and a lot of people do not know this actually, is that your tuition fee loan will be eradicated after 30 years from the date when repayment should start. In other words, from the date when you do graduate, basically 30 years from then, your student debt is essentially written off. Whatever is left will be written off. Even if it's the full amount to be written off, that's a program that the guidelines from the government. Obviously, that could change in the future because nobody knows what future governments are going to say. But this has been the case now. And in fact, previously under the Plan 1 loans, it used to be 25 years. So it's actually gone up to 30 years. It might even go up in the future. We don't know, but we just have to wait and see. It's not something that obviously you should just make all your decisions based on, but it's obviously something to be aware of because, people who are told that a debt will be written off, then, why not just take that really young? 9% of income, any income that you earn above the threshold, which is currently 27,000 per year. So once you start earning above that threshold, must go back to pay student loans. So it's taken automatically at source. You can't dispute that. If you're in a job, you're being employed, and they take that off your, pay slip, that will be going automatically straight to, the student loan to repay your debt. And you can't really say much about that. It has to go. It's not a voluntary thing, therefore. But obviously, if you're earning less than that, and most graduates, depending on where you're working, if you're not in London, you might even be earning less than that, then nothing will be deducted if it's less than 27K. Postgraduate student loans are also available. They're obviously, it's not the same structure as undergraduate student loans, but they are available, and it's actually worth researching this, paying attention to this, because a lot of people are unaware of this, and that's for some reason why some people don't carry out postgraduate studies. But actually, in some cases, it may be worth if you're given a loan and you have an interest, and you can see why that's relevant for yourself. In some cases, like medicine and dentistry and very long programs, you may have the final year actually funded by the government. And this is just an initiative to try and get people into such professions, because otherwise it can get quite expensive. The army is also well known to sponsor people if they want to do programs such as medicine. So you can become like an army medic for a few years and train with the army. That's essentially your way of repaying them for sponsoring you during your university years. And then after that, obviously, you're free to do what you want. But I think it's about 4 years right now where you have to tie yourself up with the army and work with them in the field, essentially. So if you think that might be beneficial for yourself and you're happy to do that, that's another avenue for you to look at. As Drishti mentioned, there are lots of places where you can get discounts as a student because, the number of places where students are welcome, they get a lot of discounts for all sorts of things. Like, for example, the National Rail Card is a good example. Uni days and student beans, which probably all students know about, is obviously something that, is very useful. And, I'm sure that the students also do more than just basically shop around for themselves. They probably shop around for everyone, including their families. Okay, so in terms of now the current situation, the COVID-19 situation, and how is that going to affect universities and higher education generally? Most people feel that basically this situation could have a huge impact in terms of universities, because for many reasons. One is that they're unlikely to receive as many international students coming into the country now as, like, say, for example, from China as before. And that is going to have a huge impact in terms of the university finances, and they will have to obviously try and seek those finances elsewhere, right? So they might actually, so some people feel that maybe the tuition fees may even go up, maybe may remain the same, but they're probably likely to remain the same because there's already a lot of disputes about how expensive it all is already. But they will have to find other ways of like financing themselves, because British universities used to have a very high, obviously, standard internationally, but now it's gradually slipping off. And compared to the Ivy, in terms of the Ivy League tables, essentially the British universities are really slipping up and falling back now. And with the COVID-19 situation, it's probably going to get even worse now. So they might do other things, for example, offer distance learning, and certainly some universities like Cambridge, for example, have already stated that they will do the entire academic year next year from 2020 to 21, from a distance learning perspective, in other words, online. So this is for the undergraduate studies. So other universities are likely to follow suit. I know Manchester, for example, has already decided for their first semester that's going to happen. So other universities will gradually probably follow suit. And then it obviously depends on whether that's something you may be interested in. Some people talk about like waiting another year. They might want to defer the entry for the next year. That's obviously something that has to be given good thought behind. Don't just make instant decisions. Consider all kind of perspectives put together. Obviously, the graduate job market will be as competitive as ever, even more competitive, because employers, we've all heard about how much unemployment is going to increase. Youth unemployment is already very high. And sometime this week, we expect the chancellor to do something about that, but we wait and see. But the key thing is that the important thing is that the graduate job market is going to be hit, and therefore there will be fewer spaces available, and still many graduates obviously graduating all over the country. So that means that it will just be more difficult to get jobs essentially for graduates. There will also be a situation where there are fewer international students, as I mentioned, from all over the world coming to the UK, because a lot of people will be saying, for paying so high fees, why not just go elsewhere? Or why not just or if we're going to be doing distance learning, why even bother, for example? There will be potentially more places for home students and postgrad students. Postgraduates, most likely, because obviously there's more discretion for the universities to decide on that. But in terms of home students, the government may probably not allow that, because you already have about 400 students in the lecture theatre, 100 to 400 students. That's already a huge number. So things will change, but it's obviously open to debate about how they will. Universities will potentially show greater leniency to A-level results this year, but obviously that needs to be we need to wait and see, because the reason for that is obviously they still need, with all these situations where they're not getting enough international students, they still have to fill up the places. There's still a kind of a business essentially. They need to make money. They need to make their finances and ends meet. So essentially, they may actually have a greater degree of flexibility, but let's wait and see. There's probably likely to be a surge in applications going forward from science-based programs, medicine, pharmacy, even programs like machine learning, for example, just because of the way the current situation is going, with regards to everything going online. So people are more likely to want to do things in software and IT, but also from a medical perspective and pharmaceutical perspective, there'll be lots more interest in that, because suddenly people come to the realization about how important these careers are and how safe they are, because everyone is going to be clapping hopefully for the NHS and so on. So we suddenly realize how important and secure these professions are. Universities may potentially go bust as well, because at the end of the day, they do require finances, and if there's a lot of going outs and not many things coming in, then they would actually end up in trouble. And so obviously universities did ask for finance from the government as well. So again, pointing out that there may be trouble. And also there are many more private universities actually setting up in the country. For example, Buckingham University, for example, which does private medicine, for example. kind of courses. There are many others. Aston University has also started medicine as well, but on a private basis. So it could also be the case that universities break away from the traditional structure and start looking at the private sector now suddenly. But that obviously means more fees. Even home students would have to pay more fees. They have to pay the international fees now suddenly. So it can get quite expensive. Okay, some very other important points to mention are that basically, unlike school, for example, where you're just used to seeing the same teacher, and maybe the teacher knows you well and you know the teacher well, and you have that kind of rapport amongst yourselves. In many courses and in many universities, lecturers come and go essentially. You may never even see a lecturer more than once in a 4-year program or 5-year program. And the reason for that is because obviously universities give out their lectures to people who are specialists in the field and who have a lot to say about that topic. And then for other topics, it will be different people. And these are very specialist kind of areas. In some cases, if you're having difficulty learning because university lectures can go quite quickly and there's a lot of information to absorb. So you might actually want to use a dictaphone, but before you do, you must check with the university that they're happy for you to do that because they may need consent for recording things. And in some cases, universities themselves will record all the lectures and just post them on the intranet. So you may want to just check up on that. The end of year assessments will obviously be very important, the most important things in university, but so are the ongoing assessments that still take place. So again, you have to remain focused and on the ball at all times. It's also worth noting that graduation is, okay, it's obviously fun. It's obviously, very good because it's something to celebrate, but it's also not exactly cheap. It is quite expensive. And many people believe that graduation ceremonies should be more closely monitored because it can go a bit out of hand because it's essentially a monopoly in a given university, and it can cost about £500 on average as a rough figure. In the penultimate year, for most courses, you are probably worth better off doing a summer internship in a very good organization, good employment organization, because even if you can get in there for free and offer your services for free, and they really like what you have to offer, and they like you as a person, and really like your work, they might actually offer you a job placement when you do graduate. So at least you have something to fall back on when you do graduate, rather than starting to look for jobs then, essentially. A year in industry may also be worth it. As I mentioned, sandwich courses are very important for some programs, like engineering, for example. If you really want to secure a good job, you may need to show that you spend some time in industry because the practical skills are just as important as the academic skills. And many employers, these days, they don't just rely on a traditional standard 3-year program, standard 3-year degree. They might actually be looking for a master's program because you actually need to stand out. So you need to show that you're better than the competition. So having done a 4-year program with a master's or a PhD, with the additional 3 years, then at least that shows that you are, more academic than most others. And that really, puts you above the competition. It is always worth graduating from a Russell Group university rather than a non-Russell Group university because you're more likely to end up with a better job and a higher salary. And that is, shown by multiple studies. You have to be very strategic as well in terms of, for example, for some courses, it is extremely relevant to go to the top universities if you want a very good job. But for some other courses, such as medicine and even dentistry and even veterinary, it might not be so relevant actually, because you do graduate with ultimately the same degree. You'll end up with the same original kind of foundation program. And so it wouldn't be so important where you graduate, but it'll be more important what you do after you graduate. And for vocational degrees, they probably become more common now, essentially, because of this need to look for job security. And vocational degrees always offer better job security than, say, for example, financial programs, for example, or financial careers, where it's more, obviously, in line with the economy and how it's progressing. So vocational degrees might become more common. They do offer better job security and may actually lead you straight into a job upon graduation. So, like, again, for programs like medicine and dentistry, you'll just literally find yourself in a job as soon as you graduate because you kind of guarantee that for your foundation year that you have a place of work. So it's kind of like a seamless program. There's no gaps as such. Okay, so just to summarize, university is still obviously very important. It's still one of the most important parts of higher education and making sure that you develop the key facets to develop in terms of both from a career perspective and from a personal perspective. It doesn't really matter if you end up in the same like job or same program when you graduate as what you had actually studied for, because whatever skills you gain generally are very transferable, and you can use a lot of these skills to develop yourself wherever you end up afterwards. Don't just obviously rely on things like uni league tables to decide where you want to go, because uni league tables, one, they keep changing. Two, they're not exactly reliable, because it's probably better off speaking to students who are currently in the program and seeing what they have to say about those universities. Look at student satisfaction surveys, and also speak to recent graduates, because they will tell you the honest truth about a particular, say, college, a particular university, or a particular program. So say you do gain obviously lots of transferable skills whilst at university, which is very important from a life perspective. So that really cannot be changed. You do have to be prepared for a substantial amount of change. As you say, from a learning perspective, from a perspective of having to adapt in life, in terms of independence, cooking your own food, for example, and dealing with matters like financial matters, for example, paying off your bills and things. So it's very important to be ready for that as you go to adult life as such. Be also open to kind of new ways of learning, because in university they have some excellent student like hubs. You might be better off studying there than at home, where it might be noisy. So you might just want to go into a student hub or a library, which is kind of usually open a large part of the day, sometimes even 24 hours, and just study there. So you have to be open to studying in new ways. After you do graduate, as you say, getting a job will, if anything, become more difficult than what it is right now. So you do have to make sure that you are aware of that, you're aware of the competition out there, and you try and do everything possible right now to differentiate yourself and give yourself that edge. It is always better to work for really good employers who have very high employee satisfaction kind of rates, because once you do get into a job, essentially what it is that that essentially becomes a really big part of your life, essentially, and you want to come back from work happy, knowing that actually you've done like you're interested in what you're doing. Unlike many people who actually, or many other careers where, for example, or jobs where people are most likely dissatisfied. So that's actually very important, that you look for a suitable organization where you can be happy. As I mentioned, uni is not always the best way for everyone. Some people might be better off in apprenticeships. Other people might just be better off going down another route, if depending on what program they want to follow. It's all dependent on that. If you want to do enterprise, if you want to do things like, for example, entrepreneurship, you might not even need to go to uni. It all depends. Ultimately, if you do go to university, you will come out with a massive debt, and obviously the figure will depend on how long the program was, and also obviously whether you're going to pursue further kind of studies around that. But generally, in the region of 50K to 80K is kind of normal, which includes the maintenance loans as well. And that's actually quite substantial for most people, because rather than that, you might want to put down a deposit for your first home, really, essentially, as an example. But it is one of the better types of debt, because you don't have to necessarily pay that back if the 30 years are up, as it is currently. But as I said, it is based on current circumstances. We don't know what's going to happen in the future. And obviously the grading and assessments are very different, like Drishti explained, with the first, the 2-1 and the 2-2. And, the whole pass marks being different, 40% or 50% or even 65%. And also, just to mention that the quicker the transition, the smoother the transition that you have as you go to university, and the quicker you can accept responsibility and deal with it in the right way, then I think you have the best possible chance of actually doing well and actually being successful. So thank you very much for listening to this webinar. And also, if you need any kind of information, advice, feel free to get in contact with myself. Those are my details. And now we're happy to move on to the question and answer section.